Transportation and the Caribbean. Transportation refers to means by which one communicates across lengthy distances. There are several modes of transportation. Sadly, not all can be found within the Caribbean. Modality of transportation found throughout the Caribbean include but is not limited to motor vehicles, bicycles, horse and carriages, horse and donkey, boats, ships, aeroplanes, train, in some instances tram carts. Transportation is important in any given geographical space throughout the world. As a result of the existence of various modes of transportation, trade, along with the movement of raw materials and people, are all facilitated. Public transportation is one of the few services that caters to an entire region, regardless of economic status, and offers mobility and accessibility to everyone, especially captive public transportation users. Public transportation connects persons in far and rural areas to employment, leisure activities and necessary resources. Developing countries tend to have unique transportation system characteristics separate from developed countries. One of the main differences is the prevalence of paratransit in the public transportation system. At their most basic form, paratransit modes are shared taxis or minibuses that operate on defined routes, stopping to collect or discharge passengers on demand. The concept of paratransit is intriguing, and developed countries attempted to incorporate them into their own public transit system. Studies on paratransit modes focused predominantly on Asian and African countries, though paratransit modes are prevalent in many other areas. These are the leading public transportation modes in some islands in the Caribbean region. Across the Caribbean, these modes of transport display many similarities to one another, and other paratransit modes in other developing countries. Let's look at these countries, namely Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, Guyana, St. Lucia, and Barbados. These countries consist of 5 islands, and Guyana, which shares land with other countries, such as Venezuela, Suriname, and Brazil. These countries were selected to have representation in the Greater Antilles, Windward and Leeward Islands, and Guyana, which has become one of the most dynamic oil-producing countries in the 21st century and could drastically increase its GDP in years to come. These countries vary in size, economy, and transportation system and give good depiction of the Caribbean. There is very limited documented data on the public transportation system in the Caribbean, thus the data for this share was obtained predominantly from interviews and secondary sources. Developing countries have certain characteristics differentiating them from their developed counterparts, such as extensive poverty and economic vulnerability. Tlugsing and Nunes, 2010. Though small island developing states, SIDS, are classified as developing countries, SIDS exhibit unique attributes due to geographic, social, economic and environmental characteristics. This is mainly due to their extremely small geographical size and population, insularity, remoteness and limited areas, and natural resources, making them highly vulnerable to exogenous. Though Guyana is not classified as a SIDS, it shares similar culture and history to the Caribbean islands, and therefore is deemed part of the Caribbean region. The Caribbean is mainly an arch-shaped group of islands, also includes the South American mainland such as Guyana, between North and South America. The Caribbean is divided into the Greater Antilles and Lesser Antilles. The Greater Antilles consist of Cuba, Jamaica, the island of Hispaniola, that is divided into the Dominican Republic and Haiti, and Puerto Rico. The Lesser Antilles is further divided into the Windward and Leeward Islands. The Leeward Islands span from the Virgin Islands to Dominica, while the Windward Islands span from Martinique to Trinidad and Tobago. Most of the Caribbean islands have mountainous terrain, which influences the type of road networks that are developed in those areas. Other islands, such as Barbados and Anguilla, are not of volcanic origin, and are relatively flat. The Caribbean has influence from many different cultures from colonialism as far back as the 17th century, and the early economy of the Caribbean focused on agriculture, predominantly crops, such as tobacco, coffee, spices and sugar. At present, tourism plays a major role in the economy of many Caribbean islands. The development of the economy in the Caribbean has tailored the public transportation systems to include paratransit modes. Paratransit modes of transportation exist in most if not all developing countries including the Caribbean region. The existence of paratransit modes is a common characteristic of the transportation system in developing countries, including Caribbean countries. Paratransit modes, also known as informal transit, are demand-responsive, semi-public, locally generated, public transit services that are spontaneous unconventional modes, and in some islands, these modes are the only existing public mode available. Paratransit modes take many forms. They consist of shared taxis and minibuses as well as flexible transportation that offer on-demand, door-to-door service for any origin and destination. These informal modes tend to share similar physical and operational characteristics, even though the origin countries of the modes differ. Paratransit modes are generally classified by two types, motorized and non-motorized. These modes have technical and culture adaptations and tend to dominate the public transportation system in their respective countries. Paratransit modes usually fill a market void left by the absence, or lack of accessibility of a public transit service. Despite the demand for paratransit modes, they usually have a poor perception from users. Most studies indicated that users perceive paratransit modes to be unsafe. This issue contributes to the argument of eliminating paratransit modes from transportation systems. Heavily subsidized transit companies were introduced, and they served as an essential link in urban transportation. However, the increase in the individual automobile, and the irregularity of public transport operation has impacted the ridership in public transit. Moreover, these transit companies do not operate on every route, and are scarce in more rural areas. Paratransit modes meet this void left by state-owned transit companies. In developing countries, it is common for both government-owned public transit and privately owned paratransit to coexist. However, there is a common debate about whether the bus or paratransit is superior and treat these modes as mutually exclusive systems within the public transportation. Nonetheless, case studies have shown that when state-owned and privately owned paratransit operators ply for the same fare, the latter provides equivalent, if not better services, at no subsidy. Despite this, many travelers, both car users and public transportation users, rank public bus operators much higher than paratransit modes with respect to safety and comfort. Though many are in favor of the phasing out of such modes, and incorporating more modern bus companies, it is possible for both modes to thrive together in an integrated system. This is a concept that was once attempted in the United States in the 1980s using the jeepney, because they saw the benefits of paratransit modes. Though this initial attempt was unsuccessful, paratransit modes have re-emerged in developed countries using shared taxis and rideshare companies such as Uber and Lyft. Rideshare companies are becoming more prevalent today, and have started to infiltrate into developing countries. There is a clear difference in the goal of rideshare companies using paratransit modes in developing versus developed countries. In developing countries, the platforms are developed to offer an affordable and efficient transportation service. The focus in developed countries is on convenience and environmental sustainability. These companies share very similar characteristics to traditional paratransit modes. Though they boast door-to-door transportation, this is also a characteristic of some paratransit modes, and the issue of safety is still a concern to users. Moreover, drivers for these companies share similar problems to paratransit drivers, that is, competition, safety and income security. These types of companies have proved their ability to disrupt traditional paratransit modes, and thus negatively impact the system. Nonetheless, incorporating technology into traditional paratransit modes could prove to be fruitful in improving mobility as well as the overall perception of modes. Physical and economic characteristics of the Caribbean. Tourism is an important contribution to the GDP of these Caribbean countries, as shown in Table 1. Though the national economy of most Caribbean islands is heavily dependent on tourism, some islands are focused on areas such as agriculture, mining and oil and gas. These countries vary in size and population and have their own unique roadways and characteristics. For example, Barbados has a relatively flat terrain, and thus is unrestricted by topography as it relates to roadway construction. There are approximately 1,750 kilometers of roads, of which 80% are paved. These roads are classified as primary 25%, secondary 14%, local 41% and development about 20%. The transport network consists of 7 radial highways, along with the Adams-Barrow-Cummins (ABC) highway, opened in 1989, which consists of both 2-lane and dual carriageway sections with at-grade intersections, typically roundabouts, which converge at Bridgetown. The radial highways are further linked to one another by secondary and tertiary roads. In addition, there are some 300 kilometers of private roads. The roads in the public system are usually narrow, ranging from 5.5 to 6.5 meters in most areas. Additionally, because of increased traffic growth, lack of investment and limited maintenance, the quality of the road system has deteriorated, and large sections urgently need rehabilitation. Traffic volumes in and around Bridgetown are generally high, considering that the roads have only 2 lanes. The road network within the capital city consists of narrow roads which are restricted by existing buildings and allow limited space for pedestrian traffic. As a result of the high transport demand and the narrow roads, traffic congestion is common, particularly during morning and evening rush hours. Guyana is bound by Suriname, Venezuela, and Brazil. Guyana has a relatively small population density. Its cities and towns mostly border the coast and the 3 largest rivers in Guyana, the Essequibo River, the Burbus River, and the Demerara River. This concentration of businesses and communities has influenced the existing road network. Guyana's road network is presently divided into highways, primary roads, secondary roads, tertiary roads, and trails. The highways are the links from the villages and towns to the capital city, Georgetown, where most of the labor force commutes daily. The Demerara Bridge closes daily to allow for ships to traverse the river, preventing commute between the east and west banks to cross, thus creating queues of vehicles on either end. Additionally, during peak hours, management of the bridge allows only one-way traffic flow with priority given to the higher volume along both lanes. Jamaica has over 15,000 kilometers of road that is densely configured. However, many of the nation's roads are not of a good quality. A 2005 study on the condition of the island's roadways concluded that only 12% of the network could be categorized as good. Much of Jamaica's main arterial road network developed gradually from the era of horse-drawn carriages and bridle roads to the age of the motor vehicle. Due to its genesis, a high proportion of the main road network was not originally constructed to specific engineering standards, resulting in considerable variation in the standards of alignment, construction and drainage. Because of these inconsistencies, many of the roads have been maintained on a piecemeal basis, further accentuating the uneven, fragmented nature of the network. Additionally, traffic volume has been steadily increasing over recent years. This has led to congestion problems in major towns and capitals across the island. However, the government of Jamaica undertook several projects to improve mobility and accessibility to urban, suburban and rural communities. In 2009, it was reported that more than 75% of households in Jamaica do not own a motor vehicle, emphasizing the importance of public transportation in Jamaica. Nonetheless, Kingston Metropolitan Transport Region, KMTR, implemented different traffic management strategies, with proposals for congestion mitigation for the other parishes. Highway 2000, planned as a public-private partnership, features a 4-lane controlled access, tolled motorway which consists of an east-west link and a north-south link that aims to establish an efficient motorway access. The highway is the largest infrastructure project undertaken in the English-speaking Caribbean and the only country on this list with an active toll road that can be accessed by both public and private vehicles. Also, there is a Northern Coastal Highway Improvement Project, NCIP, which links Negril in the west to Port Antonio in the east. St. Lucia. St. Lucia is a small island with relatively underdeveloped infrastructure which the government has gradually continued to invest in and modernize it since the mid-1990s. There are over 1,200 kilometers of roads, marred by unpredictability, particularly in the interior, where many may be narrow, curvy, steep, unpaved and vulnerable to landslides and storm damage. The rugged, mountainous topography has largely influenced the layout of its road networks. The concentration of main roads and highways is focused along the coast and other lower-lying areas, in an effort to avoid the mountainous interior that also holds several protected forest reserves. However, there are no alternative routes crossing the island between the coasts, which increases vulnerability to occasional hurricanes, landslides and flooding. Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad has two major transport corridors, the East-West Corridor and the North-South Corridor. Historically, these transport routes were influenced by the nation's sugar and oil industries for mining and shipping. The topography of the land was also important to where residential areas were developed, as the East-West Corridor settlements lie on the flat land at the foothills of the Northern Range. Lung, 2009. Trinidad has the unique feature of having a restricted lane called the Priority Bus Route, PBR. The PBR is the mainline haul public transportation route for the East-West Corridor. Emergency vehicles also have special preference along this route. The PBR can provide a designated, free-flowing stream of public transport vehicles, offering a time and fuel-efficient route alternatives. Trinidad is the only country on the list with this type of road. Tobago is the second island within the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, located 35 kilometers north of Trinidad. Tobago has one highway, the Claw Knoll Highway, CNH, that links many popular destinations and hubs in western Tobago. The CNH and the primary roads to the east, west and south of the highway lie on relatively flat land around the coast. These lower-capacity roads allow for multiple lanes to operate. However, the roads to the north of the highway extend uphill and are usually described as narrow and winding. What are the public transportation modes? There are three main types of public transportation modes in the countries listed: state-owned buses, minibuses and shared taxis. The focus here is strictly on shared taxis used for public transportation. Traditional private taxis that are metered are not included. Excluding Barbados, the other islands have ferry systems. Ferries are sometimes used as an alternative to road transportation, and can be classified as a public transportation mode, in countries like Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana. In the island of St. Lucia, the ferry is used for inter-island transportation, to Dominica, Guadeloupe, and Martinique. Trinidad and Tobago have a similar ferry. Jamaica and St. Lucia also use the ferry for tourism. While most ferries are privately owned, Trinidad has a government-owned ferry. The minibus, the most common, and widely used type of public transportation mode in the islands, is the minibus. This type of paratransit mode has a local variant amongst the different islands. This is a privately owned public transportation mode that is found in all 6 islands. This mode is referred to as the maxi taxi in Trinidad and Tobago, the ZR van and the minibus in Barbados, while Guyana, St. Lucia, and Jamaica identify the vehicle as the minibus. Interestingly, similar vehicles types for the minibuses are used in these countries, and this shares a culture of naming and decorating the vehicles for ease of identification. Shipping. The topography of the land was also important to where residential areas were developed, as the East-West Corridor settlements lie on the flat land at the foothills of the Northern Range. Trinidad has the unique feature of having a restricted lane called the Priority Bus Route, PBR. The PBR is the mainline haul public transportation route for the East-West Corridor. Emergency vehicles also have special preference along this route. The PBR can provide a designated, free-flowing stream of public transport vehicles, offering a time and fuel-efficient route alternatives. Trinidad is the only country on the list with this type of road. Tobago is the second island within the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, located 35 kilometers north of Trinidad. Tobago has one highway, the Claw Knoll Highway, CNH, that links many popular destinations and hubs in western Tobago. The CNH and the primary roads to the east, west and south of the highway lie on relatively flat land around the coast. These lower-capacity roads allow for multiple lanes to operate. However, the roads to the north of the highway extend uphill and are usually described as narrow and winding. Public transportation modes. There are three main types of public transportation modes in the countries listed: state-owned buses, minibuses and shared taxis. In this paper, the focus is strictly on shared taxis used for public transportation. Traditional private taxis that are metered are not included. Excluding Barbados, the other islands have ferry systems. Ferries are sometimes used as an alternative to road transportation, and can be classified as a public transportation mode, in countries like Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana. In the island of St. Lucia, the ferry is used for inter-island transportation, to Dominica, Guadeloupe, and Martinique. Trinidad and Tobago have a similar ferry. Jamaica and St. Lucia also use the ferry for tourism. While most ferries are privately owned, Trinidad has a government-owned ferry. The minibus, the most common and widely used type of public transportation mode in the islands, is the minibus. This type of paratransit mode has a local variant amongst the different islands. This is a privately owned public transportation mode that is found in all 6 islands. This mode is referred to as the maxi taxi in Trinidad and Tobago, the ZR van and the minibus in Barbados, while Guyana, St. Lucia, and Jamaica identify the vehicle as the minibus. Interestingly, similar vehicles types for the minibuses are used in these countries, and this shares a culture of naming and decorating the vehicles for ease of identification. Cases of carpooling, where a hired taxi will complete more than one job in a single trip, once given the consent of the passengers. The hired taxis do not have a specified route, and can actually be hired through phone call or text message, similar to international rideshare companies, without the app platform. The shared taxis are considered part of the public transportation system and are an alternative to the minibus. Route shared taxis operate in almost every part of Jamaica. Like their local minibus, these taxis have the PPV license plate and will usually have route taxi branded on the vehicle. These modes do follow a set route, like Trinidad and Tobago, and have defined terminals in the various towns. Similar to Trinidad and Tobago, these taxis wait until they are full to begin their journey. The fares are fixed, depending on the location, but are much cheaper than hiring a private chartered taxi. There are also cases of private vehicles operating as route taxis without the regulated PPV license, like the PH in Trinidad and Tobago. Bus. Barbados, Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago have the highest GDPs and have state-owned bus companies in operation alongside the paratransit modes. These state-owned bus companies are subsidized by the government and overall have a smaller fare than their paratransit competitors. These bus companies share similar features in that they operate along fixed routes and stop at fixed points, unlike the minibuses and shared taxis. These companies are the Public Transport Service Commission, PTSC, in Trinidad and Tobago, the Transport Board Bus Company in Barbados and the Jamaican Urban Transport Company, JUTC, in Jamaica, see Figure 5. In Trinidad and Jamaica, the PTSC and JUTC have legal rights to use the PBR and toll roads respectively. Though the countries have their unique history and culture, they share similar paratransit modes. Furthermore, in countries where both paratransit and public transit are available, the former is still more popular, despite being more expensive than the bus. Paratransit modes are valuable to the overall transportation system of those countries and have been for years. Given this, these modes have developed similar social behaviors and customs around them. The paratransit mode culture in the Caribbean. The public transportation is an important aspect of the livelihood and progression of a nation, and in SIDS and developing countries, paratransit modes play an essential part of their public transportation. In countries such as Guyana and St. Lucia, where there is no government-owned public transit system, paratransit modes are the only alternatives to captive travelers. Travelers are therefore forced to tolerate the culture and behavior of the paratransit modes. Islands such as Barbados, Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago have state-owned bus alternatives. The paratransit modes in these systems are still preferred. Oftentimes, the non-subsidized paratransit is used more frequently than the subsidized government bus, which has cheaper fare, but is often viewed as unreliable. This may be due to the lack of available buses to service all the routes. Though cheaper, the unreliability of the government-owned buses forces travelers to use the paratransit modes, even though they are not seen as the most comfortable alternative, and makes the private car more attractive. This lack of confidence in the overall public transportation system can be linked to the constant increase in vehicle ownership. Paratransit modes are commonly criticized for being unsafe and dangerous. With the exception of Trinidad and Tobago and St. Lucia, the countries have reported that the minibuses in particular are constantly overcrowded, and this behavior is encouraged by drivers and conductors. Vehicles can often be seen with passengers sitting on top of each other, with no seatbelts, and people standing in a packed vehicle. There have also been incidents of both drivers and passengers being robbed and physically harmed. This further promotes the narrative that these types of modes are unsafe, and inevitably glorifies owning a private vehicle. The minibuses are known to drive competitively and recklessly, endangering passengers and other drivers. With no standard salary for minibus drivers or conductors, their income is dependent on the number of passengers carried in a day. This creates competition between drivers to obtain as many passengers as possible, perpetuating the reckless driving. Many accidents have occurred with these modes, and some have caused fatalities. Moreover, there is a general culture of loud and offensive music, alcoholism and colorful vocabulary, again strengthening the unfavorable opinion of these modes. Nonetheless, these paratransit modes are a profitable system, though the culture is viewed negatively. Despite the challenges and negative behavior the paratransit community exhibits, its advantages cannot be disregarded, and these modes are still frequently used in the public transportation system. Paratransit modes have emerged and remain in the Caribbean due to their reliability being driven by profit and economic growth. This drives the operators to work longer hours, increase their frequency of operation, and increase the vehicles that service a particular route, therefore reducing the waiting time for travelers on that route. Furthermore, the unscheduled nature of the system allows for the operation on routes that are used by the paratransit service providers and are not serviced by the state-owned systems, giving a more demand-driven approach for travelers. As a result, areas that have a need for the service can be quickly addressed rather than waiting for governmental intervention. From the operator's perspective, it provides opportunities of employment to poor or low-skilled workers, thus stimulating socio-economic growth. Government-owned public transport in the researched territories is either non-existent, inefficient, or struggles to provide comprehensive coverage to large sections of the population. Many residents live a significant distance away from the cities, which are typically focused on business activity. There may be few transfer hubs to provide ease of accessibility to communities further away from the city centers. The paratransit modes avoid the deficiencies of the main transportation system, which does not service the less populated areas. Modes like the shared taxi in Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana and Jamaica are also more convenient for the elderly and disabled, as they offer more flexibility and comfort in reaching their final destination. Captive travelers require a dependable mode of transportation to comfortably and safely conduct their daily activities. In some cases, the ridership of paratransit modes is more than double the ridership of the government bus company. This has raised the question whether the government needs to provide its own public transportation alternative. Both Guyana and St. Lucia have shown that their unsubsidized paratransit system can operate without a state-owned bus. Furthermore, the government buses tend to have low technical performance and output due to a lack of incentive. Rideshare companies have also become very popular in developed countries, and their service is slowly trickling down to developing countries. Such platforms are popular in areas of Asia and Africa. Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados and Jamaica are the only Caribbean countries discussed in this paper that have local rideshare apps available for the public. There was a period of time when Uber was present in Trinidad and Tobago, but that was short-lived. Though rideshare platforms are a relatively new concept to the Caribbean, Guyana has a similar system integrated into their public transportation system, by the means of their shared taxi public transportation service. Though this is only a dial-up system, where patrons pay with cash, there is capacity to digitize this service. In Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados and Jamaica, these rideshare companies are used as an option when going to social gatherings, and as a cheaper alternative to hiring private taxis for these events. However, these rideshare services have the potential to be alternatives to using the public transportation maxi-taxi, route-shared taxi service, ZR or minibus for everyday travel. This new option in the transportation system could supply travelers with a safer environment. Thus, rideshare companies can threaten the livelihood of the current and traditional paratransit operators. In spite of the negative culture of the paratransit modes, the governments in these territories have acknowledged the pivotal role in the transportation system and their ability to pragmatically adapt to the local market, and thus have provided incentives to ensure that the paratransit system continues to thrive, by establishing transfer hubs, maintaining infrastructure such as the PBR in Trinidad, relaxing enforcement on infringements, such as speeding and overloading of passengers, and giving subsidies on vehicular fuels. Nonetheless, the issues of safety and comfort with the paratransit systems need to be addressed to create a more attractive alternative to captive travelers and private car users. In conclusion, this share has highlighted the essential role that paratransit modes play in some Caribbean territories. The islands in this study vary in size, population, GDP, and yet share similar physical and operational characteristics in the public transportation system, especially the paratransit modes. Despite its many shortcomings, the paratransit systems evident in the Caribbean countries highlighted in this study can offer a solution to some of the transportation problems in those countries, and be an instrumental part of the public transportation system in developing countries. Without the financial aid necessary to construct and maintain an efficient public mass transit system, populations are forced to create their own solutions, restricted by available resources. The existing paratransit modes presented in this overview form part of this solution. Nonetheless, people are still largely dissatisfied with the quality of service provided by them. While paratransit can provide a solution, it needs to be optimized and properly integrated into the transportation system. It is necessary for governments to make the public transportation a priority and to invest in an efficient and well-planned system that can work in harmony with the organically growing paratransit system. An integrated approach utilizing both the government-owned bus company and the paratransit modes can be a profitable and efficient, and intervention by the government to skillfully manage this integrated system is necessary. Future work should consist of research into different solutions to the problems faced by the transportation system, such as the suitability of a bus rapid transit system, improving law enforcement around the public transportation system, and improvement of public transportation transfer hubs. More studies could focus on possible policy changes to improve the system overall. However, in order to accomplish this, data is needed. In this manuscript, it is acknowledged that there is a shortage of readily available data in the Caribbean, particularly in the smaller islands. Data is not only necessary to make any relevant changes, but it is something that needs to be collected regularly to see trends and understand changes. While census data is already collected in the Caribbean, it is suggested that the data be collected more frequently, and information on transportation should be integrated in. Data such as amount and cost of vehicles in a household, and average cost per trip of both car and public transportation users could be very useful. Cost of vehicles versus mean income of the population and vehicle ownership percentage can indicate how transportation choices are made, as well as how much people are willing to spend on the convenience of a private car and the quality of the public transportation system. Transportation studies, such as travel demand studies, trip pattern data, and ridership data need to be conducted. Having a better understanding of how much trips people make per day, the amount of transfers from one transit mode to another can highlight inefficiencies within the system and where to focus on for improvement. Likewise, any proposed solution should undergo a feasibility study to ensure that the solution is reasonable and sustainable. Attempts should be made to forecast potential conditions so that measures can be proactive rather than reactive. In addition to paratransit, there are air and rail transportation throughout the Caribbean. Rail transport first arose in the insular Caribbean region in the 17th century, largely as a result of the colonial sugar trade. Given the high sugar production rates across the region, with Barbados, Jamaica and the Leeward Islands experiencing a general sugar boom in the 18th century, a commercial land-based transport system that was more modernized than horse-drawn transportation was deemed necessary to facilitate export efficiency between the numerous sugar plantations and ports. Further agricultural developments continued to fuel the construction of rail systems, leading to their eventual use for passenger transport, particularly in larger islands such as Cuba, Jamaica, and Trinidad. Nevertheless, as the mighty Spitfire describes in his 1940s Calypso Last Train to San Fernando, the majority of rail transportation services in the insular Caribbean were terminated as the sugar industry went into decline, with the exception of a few island states like Cuba, which continues to enjoy an established passenger metro system in La Habana, the Dominican Republic with its Santo Domingo Metro network, and Jamaica, whose service now exclusively facilitates the national bauxite industry. Cultivation and export of other important crops such as bananas and coffee in the 19th century and early 20th century, together with the 1848 California gold rush, also led to the construction of railways in the mainland countries of the Caribbean region. 1855 saw the opening of the Panama Railroad crossing the Isthmus of Panama in what was then Colombia, for the transportation of passengers, gold and other materials, while 1877 heralded the opening of a railway between Puerto San Jose and Escuintla in Guatemala for transporting bananas. A 410-kilometer-long railway was also opened around the same time in Mexico, connecting Mexico City to Port Veracruz on the Pacific coast for trade, while the U.S.-based United Fruit Company and Standard Fruit Company led other railway projects in Belize and Honduras in the early 1900s. Recent studies conducted by the Association of Caribbean States and the Inter-American Development Bank examining freight transport and regional port and maritime strategies recommend the improvement of hinterland transport connections so that principal gateway ports may better attend to growing economies located in rural areas, and consequentially reduce trading costs. As the most important facilitator of the Latin American and Caribbean region's participation in the global market, according to the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, maritime transport is responsible for around 90% of international freight traffic. The Greater Caribbean region, which comprises numerous sea-locked nations, is home to 100 ports and over 165 maritime services, with 69 shipping lines and over 640 ships traversing its basin, carrying an annual total in excess of 2 million TEU. With maritime traffic expected to increase following the imminent completion of the Panama Canal expansion, the current construction of the Nicaragua Grand Canal, and several regional port development projects, emphasis has been placed on enhancing regional port competitiveness by improving connections between ports and inland areas. The improvement of such transport linkages would therefore benefit Caribbean maritime trade in economic terms by facilitating the development of the regional logistics chain as well as the global value chain of which ports and the clients that they serve are a key part. Recognizing the need for better hinterland to port access, larger mainland countries of the Greater Caribbean with major port hubs are thus using railways as a complement to advancing shipping efficiency and regional competitiveness in sea trade alongside the Nicaragua and Panama Canal developments, through the construction of dry canals housing both rail and road transport structures. Colombia's national coal industry, for example, with an approximate annual output rate of 90 million tons, is dependent on rail connections given the distance between ports and inland production sites. Similarly, Honduras is currently investing $10 billion in building an interoceanic rail line comprising 10 railways spanning 600 kilometers between the country's Pacific and Atlantic coasts, with a view to increase freight handling capacity between two deep-water ports, Isla del Tigre and Puerto Costilla, which will be able to accommodate post-Panamax vessels upon completion in 2030. Guatemala has also embarked on a similar project to construct an interoceanic corridor that will include 2 freight rail lines alongside a 372-kilometer-long highway, connecting 2 planned ports, San Luis on the Pacific coast and San Jorge on the Atlantic coast. This venture will additionally establish transfer zones that would interlink with markets in surrounding countries such as El Salvador. Likewise, Costa Rica is presently in the process of developing a major transshipment port in the area of Moine, to be later followed by a dry canal housing a high-capacity container railway connecting the port to others on the country's Pacific and Atlantic coasts. Notwithstanding the fairly short distances to cover in Caribbean island nations, together with significant competition from the trucking industry, railways can help improve port performance by enhancing the links between production sites and ports for trade, particularly in the larger island states, consequently improving hinterland access, reducing shipping time and thus increasing the cost efficiency of port services. Despite its decline in the insular region, rail transport undoubtedly continues to be an important complement to the Greater Caribbean's transport network, whether on a national level or a regional level, acting as a passageway through which extra-regional territories can engage with Caribbean countries and providing a means for intra-regional economic linkages. While the establishment of rail systems may be concentrated in the mainland territories of the Greater Caribbean, and although the extent of regional rail transport systems may not compare to the magnitude of the regional maritime shipping network, the Caribbean rail has not been lost and it has not been forgotten. It is now essential for regional transport stakeholders to understand the role that rail can potentially play in promoting development, both in economic and environmental terms, to secure the Caribbean's future. According to the World Bank, living in the time of COVID-19 has underscored how difficult it is to maintain our distance. Many of us are longing for a time when we can feel comfortable to reconnect with our family and friends and restart regular economic activity. Here in the Caribbean, with connections and relations spread across the region, intra-island travel is frequent. Travel serves to deepen relationships, enhance trade, and leads to a deeper regional connection. Whether it's traveling to carnivals or to watch a cricket match or exploring business opportunities on another island, air travel brings the Caribbean people together. Airports make such travel fast and frequent and are the portal for the rest of the world to experience the Caribbean. Nearly 9.1 million tourists visited the Caribbean in 2019, and a large number of those passed through airports. No doubt, those numbers will be different for 2020 with border closures and a halt in tourism. However, while the borders are closed now, it is an opportune time to prepare for when we are traveling again. In addition to passenger travel, air transport is also essential for facilitating trade for island nations. The volume of freight attributed to air transport in the Caribbean small states increased over 50% between 2016 and 2018. While you may not see cargo moving through airports, some of what you will be purchasing, including food, travels by air. This is not only true for imports but exports as well. Recently, the World Bank worked with the governments of Dominica, Grenada and St. Lucia to develop a series of projects to improve their airports and air transport sectors. $75 million will be used to improve safety and resilience of the air transport sector in these countries, and another $84 million project was also approved for Haiti. Airport improvements will directly provide more safety and comfort to travelers. The new projects will help these airports comply with international safety standards and will improve connectivity in the Caribbean. Connecting the region is a priority for the Caribbean community, CARICOM. In his final address for 2019, CARICOM's Secretary General, Ambassador Erwin LaRocque said that an increase in air travel can boost growth and employment. Air travel can play an important role in stimulating economic activity throughout the region and in supporting continued regional integration and cooperation. Countries in the Eastern Caribbean are at higher risk from natural disasters. The new projects will provide critical infrastructure and equipment to support increased resilience of the airports and the air transport sector. As we are learning, Air travel is also vulnerable not only to climate-related disasters, but also to other crises, like the current pandemic. When speed is essential, supplies, equipment and personnel are rapidly flown in to provide support where it is most needed. Notwithstanding risks, airports are the gateway to opportunities. Airports can become a catalyst to regenerate economic activity as the small island states begin to reopen. Improvements in the air transportation sector will help meet the future flow of travelers, whether visiting family, coming for business, or to enjoy the sun, sea and sand of the Caribbean. A good transportation sector is considering the driving force of any modernized country's economic growth plan. Transportation allows for the importation of raw materials needed within the manufacturing and mining sector as well as movement of finished goods to the respective markets. Why do we really need transportation? Let's look in depth into other factors. Transportation increases the ability of persons to move and communicate with each other. Transportation promotes industrial, commercial activities. Persons need modes of transportation so as to move materials and finished goods from point A to point B. A good transportation system seen as a stimulant to the agricultural development and further development. Persons are able to move their products effectively out of the farm and to the point of sale. Road transportation. Road transportation is usually the cheapest means of transportations. Roads are used to transport large items and machinery. Road networks are more flexible than the other means of transportation. They allow for the quick and direct movement of goods from one point to another. It is a quick means of communication. A good transportation system encourages the establishment of new settlement. Railway roads influence the massive movement of agricultural product, animals and minerals. Many industries are located where accessibility to labor, road, and a good market is available. Roads are used by laborers and/or passenger to both work and other places of their destinations. Roads are constructed avoiding steep slopes, ranges and swampy lowland areas. Several problems are associated with road transportation. Air pollution, traffic congestion, noise pollution has become a nuisance. Possible solutions to the listed problems cited above. These include, the use of railway, subway will decrease the traffic in urban areas, cities. The practice of carpooling using one type of transport. Having a shuttle system linked to underground parking space. The use of train lines along specified routes. The use of overpass and bypasses. The decentralization of secondary and tertiary activities. Rail transportation. Countries within the developed regions have made use of the idea of rail transportation. Within the Caribbean, rail transportation is not prevalent. This is because of the steep tension of the mostly steep slopes which surround towns, cities and ports. Railways require flat or gently sloping gradients. Only a few Caribbean countries have this type of communication service. Countries such as Jamaica and Guyana have a dysfunctional system. The railway is used to transport bauxite and to some extent sugar cane was transported via railway in Trinidad before 1999. With rail transportation, it can transport a volume of passengers, animals, agricultural crops, raw materials and industrial products are transported via the railway. Railway can transport large bulky volumes at a first rate over a very long distance. Railway transportation is cheap in comparison to other modes transportation. The railway provides a link between ports and towns that congested meted out by vehicles traffic is avoided. Persons can commute from far distances to their place of work. However, some disadvantages of rail transportation are that, there are standard gauge lines follow a defined route. Your exact destination may exist meters or miles away from your closest train station. This makes the servicing flexible. It is difficult and inconvenient to transport miscellaneous freight of small products. Air transport in the Caribbean, it serves as a mean to link isolated territories. Airports are located on extensively flat sites for takeoff to occur easily. An airport cannot be located within a hilly terrain. Small airports link rural agricultural and mining areas with major cities. Notes: these follow a great circle as they are the shortest point linking two areas. Advantages of air transportation. Air transportation provides quick linkage between countries. It ensures the delivery of goods within a short time. It also allows the quick movement of persons. Transport cargoes to factories. Transports high-volt cargo, for example jewelry. It allows fashionable goods to reach market quickly. It ensures the quick transportation of perishable products, for example frozen meats, vegetables, etc. Air transportation stimulates trade and industry. It saves on foreign exchange. The face of global maritime trade has changed considerably over the past few decades. The dawn of containerization in the mid-20th century, together with the recent development of new Panamax and Tripoli vessels, has facilitated the annual transportation of billions of tons today. Notwithstanding this evolution, the maritime industry is still dominated by liners and tramp shipping, or ships that do not have a fixed schedule or published ports of call. While this may be so, the changes in the industry, particularly with respect to the increase in the size of vessels plying the Caribbean, present challenges not only for regional governments and ports, but also for local shipping and its survival. The industry is currently facing significant pressure, due to its own lack of competitiveness and to a regional governance focus that has turned its attention towards large-scale shipping. The Caribbean has had a long history of inter-island maritime shipping, with efforts to develop regional shipping industry ever since the formation of the West Indies Federation in 1958. The particular geography of the Caribbean makes shipping indispensable for facilitating domestic trade. Accordingly, the governments of the day, in recognizing that establishment of maritime connectivity between the islands would underpin their economic development, launched the West Indies Shipping Company, WISCO, in 1963. The company, which was owned jointly by several of the islands, operated 2 ships which visited every island twice monthly, providing a crucial sea link between the islands, expanding intra-community trade among the islands of the region. The service, while successful in expanding trade between the islands themselves and also the USA, failed to make a profit and was subsidized by the governments. The service collapsed in 1992, some 29 years after its inception, as regional government were no longer able to support the service. The expansion of the Panama Canal is now expected to drive a new phase for the development of the shipping industry in the Caribbean. However, the advent of bigger ships will likely provide challenges for the region. While there has been a shift by the bigger ports to capitalize on opportunities in the transshipment business, this shift is likely to propagate a growth in ship size within the feeder network. Evidence suggests that there will be some marginalization as the larger shipping lines consolidate their activities in a few main ports to reduce operating costs. In this regard, it is the small local ship operator that will likely continue to provide the services that the islands depend on. Development of the feeder network itself, however, will provide opportunities for rationalizing of the region's informal shipping services, thus presenting itself as a viable option for the future viability of the region's smaller ports. Despite the uncompetitive nature of the industry which led to the collapse of WISCO, other services have been established to facilitate trade within the basin. Today the regional marine transport sector is comprised of both a formal and a less well-organized informal group, typically referred to as the schooner sector. In the former, services are provided by international shipping lines providing access from the islands directly to the USA or Europe, and to regional hubs as well as other islands. The region now enjoys approximately 170 regular shipping services, with over 650 vessels in operation, distributed over approximately 70 shipping lines, with a total fleet capacity of over 2,100,000 TEUs. The informal or schooner sector, active mostly in the Leeward and Windward Islands, is characteristically a local industry with local operators operating small ships with cargo capacity of less than 500 tons. It is this service that is of significant importance to smaller islands in the region. The small vessels typically operate in a particular trade and run what is in essence a liner service with some regularity. The length of the voyage is determined by the trade that the vessel is in rather than the size of the vessel itself. These vessels are usually converted fishing boats or small roll-on roll-off, row-row, ships with ramps, allowing cargo to be moved on board by forklift or small trailer and then stowed conventionally. The informal services provide almost all the small parcel, break bulk and cargo movements between the islands. The vessels carry local produce, personal effects, small-scale industrial products, empty containers as outgoing cargo, construction material and manufactured goods for retailers. Despite its dominant niche market position, the industry is generally in decline, although thriving well in a few territories. The market is highly fragmented with limited coordination among stakeholders as well as little public sector support for its development. Much of the business is conducted informally, relies on knowledge of the captain or the agency to approach. The lack of strategic development plans for the industry and in related cross-cutting sectors such as agriculture and tourism, coupled with weak regulatory oversight, have not served to facilitate its growth. While the regional shipping industry currently appears to be at risk from external pressures, the opportunity for its survival may well lie in the same factor which led to the formation of the West Indies Shipping Corporation, Intra-Regional Trade. Data on trade and CARICOM shows that intra-regional trade accounts for approximately 14% of total trade compared to over 60% for the European Union, and intra-regional exports represent only 6% of the region's total trade. A closer examination reveals that while this value is negligible for some member states, it is quite significant to others, as for some countries intra-regional exports accounts for upwards of average 30% of their total exports. The figures however suggest that there is significant room for the enhancement of internal trade with the region. This has for a long time suffered from high costs for moving goods, due in part to poor connectivity, small thin economies, the unidirectional nature of trade between the islands, and the effects of taxation and internal inefficiencies. As a result, transport costs and insurance within the region are 30% higher than the world average, and maritime transport costs in the Caribbean are almost twice the global average. The development of a customs union and the free circulation of goods within the Eastern Caribbean economic space may well provide the catalyst for the provision of more enhanced local shipping services, driving development of more services available, and reducing the cost of the same. Reductions in the cost of shipping will likely lead to a reduction in cost of goods available and thus spur growth in intra-regional trade. Notwithstanding this, it must be accepted that the operators in the informal sector will need to improve their own efficiencies in order to survive possible competition. With the support of more appropriate legislation, however, the regional schooner services could have operating costs that will make them competitive in this new global environment.